unknowingly revealed his intentions to an off-duty police officer in a bar. The documents show how the FBI, which helped secure the monarch's safety during her visits in the late 80s and early 90s, worried about IRA threats. Half-term holidaymakers are set for disruption after British Airways cancelled more than 40 flights today due to an IT issue at Heathrow Airport. The airline's urging passengers to check their flight status before travelling. Some flights this evening have already been delayed. The tech issue also caused more than 50 domestic and European flights to be cancelled yesterday, with around 16,000 passengers affected. MPs are warning that the government's levelling up policy must change its approach or remain unlikely to achieve its objectives. A cross-party report found it has significant flaws and a lack of transparency is hindering progress for achieving regional economic equality. The report found a lack of long-term funding for local councils is threatening levelling up failure. Now, the UK is expected to see the hottest day of the year so far this weekend. The Met Office says the temperatures could reach as high as 24 degrees, with the forecast set to continue into next week. The highest temperature so far this year has been recorded in Cardiff on Monday at 23.4 degrees. And a life-size Lego model of a luxury sports car has been unveiled at Legoland in Windsor. The model of the Ferrari Daytona SP3 has been built using more than 400,000 Lego bricks. It weighs more than 1.5 tonnes and it took more than 2,000 hours to create it. The car will be a permanent feature of Windsor's new interactive attraction called Lego Ferrari Build and Race. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Esther and Phil.
Thanks, Tatiana. Now, we woke up to the news this morning that an 11-year-old boy has been taken to hospital in a critical condition after being hit by a police van in Lancashire.
Lancashire police say it happened just before 8:30 last night as officers were responding to an emergency call. Our thoughts are with the child's loved ones at this time, they said.
The force says an investigation is underway and the matter has been referred to the Independent Office for Police Conduct. Well, we're joined now by former Met Police Detective Peter Blexley. Peter, thank you for joining us. Obviously, a terrible incident in Lancashire last night, and we'll leave the investigators to work out what exactly happened there. But what will the IOPC be specifically looking at? What things will they be taking into account when they conduct this investigation?
Firstly, I'd just like to say that my thoughts are with this child and everyone who loves him, and I hope he makes a swift and full recovery. The scene of this collision will already have been examined to see if the position of the vehicle or any other vehicles potentially involved, any debris can give any indicators as to exactly how the collision occurred, together with any tyre marks that there might be on the road, because from tyre marks, traffic investigators can calculate speeds and the like, braking distances. And it's surprising just how much information a tyre mark can reveal. The IOPC now will invariably be looking for CCTV, possible automatic number plate recognition cameras, any other kind of traffic monitoring cameras that might have been in the location to see if they can secure any footage. They will also examine the possibility of whether the police vehicle had any black box type technology fitted to it or any telematics that were installed when the vehicle was manufactured, because that technology can give you precise data about speeds, distances, locations, and all that kind of pretty vital information.
And Peter, the police officer, what will he be going through now? What process will he be going through since 8:30 last night?
Yes, well, both the driver and if there was a passenger, I hope, are the subjects of a full post-incident procedure, because, of course, an incident such as this is very traumatic for anybody involved in it, not only perhaps just the driver, the passenger, and, of course, this poor child, but witnesses as well may have been traumatised. So I do hope that sufficient resources are being deployed to help these people through very traumatic incidents. We do know that policing as a whole has really appalling numbers of officers away from work because of various sickness issues. And this has been a staggering problem, particularly in the Metropolitan Police. So, yes, I hope there is a real awareness as to the needs of anybody involved in this dreadful incident, and I hope they're all getting the help they require.
Peter Blexley, thank you very much indeed.
Anyone with any information or who has any CCTV or dash cam footage that may assist the investigation is being asked to call 101 and quote log 1388 of May 25th.
And a spokesperson for the IOPC says, we understand that a marked police van with its lights and sirens on was in a collision with an 11-year-old boy. He has been taken to hospital and our thoughts are with him and his family. Our investigation is at an early stage. Now, concerns are growing over safety and security at Whitehall. It's since a man was arrested on suspicion of criminal damage and dangerous driving after a vehicle was driven into the gates of Downing Street.
The Met Police say no one has been hurt, and it's understood that counter-terrorism police are not involved in the investigation at this stage.
Rishi Sunak is understood to have been in Downing Street when the crash happened, and many civil servants were leaving work at the time.
To discuss this safety and security for MPs, we're joined by former senior military intelligence officer Philip Ingram, MBE. Philip, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Good morning.
I mean, do you think that the security of MPs, Parliament, government ministers, do you think that it is sufficient or do you think it is too lax?
No, it's sufficient, and there's an awful lot of work going on to survey the wider security issues after the horrible murder of Sir David Amos, and look at how MPs can be better protected in their constituencies. And around Whitehall, security is very, very tight indeed.
And so, I mean, you talk about security of MPs in their constituencies where obviously there isn't the same amount of security people around. I mean, where do you think that the balance should be struck between having an open, accessible democracy and guaranteeing the safety of people who are in public life?
Well, unfortunately, in an open democracy, you can't guarantee anything. And this is where the security services, along with some fantastic public-private partnerships going on, working with MPs themselves, can get whatever the most optimal security situation is for them. MPs come from every part of the country. There are different threats for different MPs in different areas, depending on their profile, depending where they live, depending on how they carry out their business. And this is why it has to be a tailored solution for each individual MP to ensure that they can do what they need to do and engage with their constituents and represent them properly and safely in Whitehall.
What sort of checks are done around MPs to see if there is a threat against them?
Well, the security service and the security staff within Parliament will be monitoring to see if there is anything specific that's coming up. But, I think MPs themselves and MP staff get a better feel for what's going on in their constituencies. And I know there are surveys and training sessions being put together to make MPs and their staffs more aware of what's going on so that they can get that sort of gut feeling and understanding whether there's a change in circumstances in their constituencies that could potentially lead to a threat against them. It's something that, it's where everyone has to work together on this. And actually the person who's probably best placed to understand if there's a threat against them specifically is the MP themselves. There will be,
Philip,
and there are people at a higher level looking out for any bigger issues that get flagged up.
Philip, I asked that question because obviously when I was Secretary of State for the Department of Work and Pensions and there were protests on the time, I was very impressed with the online surveillance that was done, watching and monitoring all of the social output. So, as you say, so it was bespoke to each MP and minister.
Yes, and there's more bespoke advice being put together. I know that the government is working with a very large security provider, and they are surveying each MP in their constituency office and providing advice and training as necessary to help protect them after the horrible incidents that there have been over the past few years. But unfortunately, I think in an open and democratic society, you're never going to be able to keep everyone safe 100% of the time. You can do as much as you can to keep people as safe as possible. But when you're engaging with members of the public who've got grievances about things, it's very difficult in the spur of the moment to know what potential risk they're going to be.
Philip Ingram, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Now, the 14th of June will mark 6 years since the Grenfell Tower fire, which tragically saw 72 people lose their lives.
Today, the Prince of Wales will visit Loftus Road, the home of Queen's Park Rangers Football Club, to hear how the club has provided invaluable support since the tragedy, as well as meet some of the affected community.
Well, let's cross live now to our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, who's outside the stadium, to let us know what's happening right now.
Hi, Esther. Yes, well, I think it's a tragedy, really, which really affected Prince William. It was just 2 days after the tragic fire, which, as you said, claimed the lives of 72 people, that he and his late grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, visited emergency service workers and survivors and those who had quite literally lost everything in that fire. Last year, he attended the 5th anniversary memorial service alongside the Princess of Wales at the foot of Grenfell Tower. He also took part in a special DIY SOS episode refurbishing a boxing club used by Grenfell Tower survivors. So you might be wondering why I'm stood outside a football stadium rather than Grenfell Tower itself, and as you said, it is because Prince William is here. He's going to be meeting survivors and bereaved family members as well, but also the Queen's Park Rangers Football Club has provided a lot of support actually to Grenfell Tower survivors over the last 6 years, because they have a particular trust, and Prince William will be meeting the former Queen's Park Rangers and England striker Les Ferdinand a bit later on today, and the chief executive of the community trust run by Queen's Park Rangers here, and they have funded community workers who provide support to Grenfell Tower survivors, and that support includes mentoring. It provides mental health support as well, and personal development too for those who quite literally lost everything almost 6 years ago. That following all of that, as I've said, he is going to be meeting survivors, but also members of a community who'd set up local fundraising activities to raise money for Grenfell survivors. So football matches like Games for Grenfell and the Grenfell Memorial Cup, the organisers of those Prince William will be meeting a little bit later on today. So that's all expected to kick off, as it were, a bit later on, and I'll be keeping you right up to date here on GB News.
Cameron, we've just been talking about security of Whitehall, security of MPs and ministers, but actually you also have to think about the security of the royal family. And we've just heard there was an assassination attempt on the Queen. What was it, back in 1983? Can you give us some more information on that?
Yes, so this is a bunch of files that has been released by the FBI following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, and one of those files talks of a 1983 assassination plot to kill Queen Elizabeth II when she was on a visit to California. So the tip-off came from a police officer in San Francisco who frequented an Irish pub, and an Irish man basically threatened to kill Queen Elizabeth II. He was seeking revenge for his daughter, who had been killed in Northern Ireland by a rubber bullet. Now, that threat came on the 4th of February 1983, so around a month before the Queen and Prince Philip travelled to California. And the alleged assassination attempt included dropping an object from the Golden State Bridge in San Francisco onto the Royal Yacht Britannia as it was sailing underneath, as well as an assassination attempt in Yosemite National Park too. Now, in response to the threat, the Secret Service closed off the walkways of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco to stop anyone dropping objects. It's understood there was also some measures put in place at Yosemite National Park as well, although we're not exactly sure what those that particularly was. But of course, no assassination attempt was made. Queen Elizabeth still travelled to California, so it looks like security services and the FBI did a good job.
Cameron Walker, thank you very much indeed. You forget about all of this is going on every minute of the day to keep everybody protected there, and we'll be catching up with him later and with Prince William.
Now, coming up is the civil service deliberately hounding out the Tories. The former head of PR at 10 Downing Street, Giles Kenningham, has his say next.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back. It's Friday morning with Esther and Phil, and it's 10:23. Now, Partygate has sprung back on the political agenda, with Boris Johnson referred to the police over new allegations he broke lockdown rules with gatherings at Chequers during the COVID pandemic.
This week also saw Suella Braverman held to task after she reportedly asked for help from the civil service in dealing with a speeding fine.
It begs the question, well, it certainly does, doesn't it? Are certain members of the Tory party being hounded out by the civil service? Well, joining us now to discuss this is former head of PR at 10 Downing Street in the Cameron years, Giles Kenningham, MBE. So, really, have we got activist civil servants wanting to oust the Tory government?
I mean, certainly I've never seen anything like it. There has been, pretty much an unprecedented number of leaks. And really, I think what you're seeing is a civil service who feel emboldened and who probably think the Tory government is in its dying days. I think there's going to be a new administration, so there's no sense of fear there. I mean, I think the level of leaks and the level of detail of the leaks has been quite astounding at times. And I do think we have a situation where they think they can do this without any consequence. So, yeah, I mean, I would be incredibly worried if I was inside number 10 and the government at the moment, because these leaks are pretty explosive at time, and they are incredibly destabilising to the administration.
Giles, if you were there, you said you'd be pretty worried if you were in number 10 now. Obviously, you've got an array of leaks. You've got some going to The Guardian about that was bullying with Rob. You've got some deciding they'll send information to the police. You've got others putting a story about Suella asking for help. What would you do if you were in number 10 now? Could you do anything?
Well, I think the point is they have to find one of these leakers and make an example of them. I mean, I remember the ironic moment when I was in there and there was a leak inquiry. And we actually found who the leaker was. And one of the senior civil servants said the whole point of leak inquiries is not to find the leaker. There was almost they were almost incredulous that we'd actually found someone. Normally they're complete whitewash. So there has to be a sense of fear that otherwise people will do this, and then they are doing it emboldened and without any consequence.
I want to know what he did with the leaker once you found them. Did they lose the job? What do you do?
Yeah, I think they did, but I think at the time it was a Lib Dem special advisor, and they just ended up losing their payoff when they left government. But I think they only got found out because they actually coughed in the end. There still wasn't the kind of explosive information. But I mean, this is the problem with many of the inquiries; they are just a complete joke. But you would think in the age of sort of, I don't know, WhatsApp, it's very hard not to leave a digital footprint when you do stuff, that really they've got to sort of get to the bottom of it. I mean, details about Boris Johnson's personal finances, whatever you think about him, I mean, it is amazing and astounding that ends up in the public domain, because surely it was only known by a handful of people, 3 or 4, and yet that ends up on the front page of the Sunday Times. And you're seeing, this with a regular drumbeat of stories.
Thank you very much indeed. Oh, he's gone before we even...
Chancellor, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us there, Giles.
Now, some MPs fear a new treaty designed to increase the World Health Organisation's powers could enable it to enforce border closures and vaccine passports.
6 Conservative MPs, that's including myself, are calling
and me.
And me, that's 2 of us here, are calling for a Commons vote on the draft treaty and regulations before they are signed, making sure that Parliament does stay sovereign.
Joining us to discuss this is Conservative MP Sir Christopher Chope, OBE, and Senior Clinical Lecturer at University of Exeter Medical School, Dr Bharat Pankania. Chris Chope, if we can start with you first, what are specifically your concerns about this?
My principal concern is that there is a move afoot within the WHO to transform it from being an advisory body to one which is able to compel members to behave in a particular way. And that will completely change the character of the organisation. And the organisation itself has come under a lot of scrutiny recently because it seems as though it's controlled essentially by China. China nominated the chief executive, the director general, and it's also funded not just by independent countries, but also by large foundations, particularly the Bill Gates Foundation. So, question mark, is it independent? We won't need to worry about that as long as it hasn't got the powers to compel us as a sovereign nation to do things we don't want to do.
Now, in the House of Commons on Monday the 17th of April, the Government Minister Anne-Marie Trevelyan said, and I'm quoting what she said, "The speculation that somehow the instrument will undermine UK sovereignty and give the World Health Organization powers over national public health measures is simply not the case." Does that reassure you? Do you not believe her when she says that?
Well, that may not have been the case in April, but we know that since then there have been something like 300 amendments put forward to achieve exactly that objective of giving the WHO control. And our minister said, I think in response to an article in today's newspaper, that he would fight against that. But there hasn't been any evidence that the UK government has been fighting against it. And indeed, at the same time as saying he's fighting against it, the minister's saying he's in favour of the pandemic treaty. And that's why I very much go along with the idea that there should be more public and parliamentary scrutiny of what's happening.
Dr. Pankania, I mean, what is it about the World Health Organization's record that should give us confidence that we want to give them more powers and more controls over what happens in our country?
Let me rephrase it for you, if you may. We've only got one organization that leads on maintaining the planetary health. And the WHO is the only body we have from the United Nations. And if you wish to recreate a WHO, it may be a lot worse than what we've already got. What we have to do and what we have to look at is this. When a pandemic of this ilk, like we've just had, strikes, we've got to be prepared, and we've got to be prepared internationally. We've had international health regulations, care of the WHO. However, those international health regulations were never properly followed. And what is proposed is a better cooperation between member states so that we respond better, but not only respond better, but we support each other. So these things are really, really important to save lives globally. We saw how Africa was
Dr. Barrett, Dr. Barrett, if we can just come in here. The things like international cooperation, things about coordination, things about transparency, nobody is questioning that WHO.
Sure.
What they're talking about is this now being binding and compelling, going from advisory to actually being the authoritative body. Do you not have some concerns with that, particularly as the WHO oscillated somewhat in their views?
No, I do not have those concerns because member states remain sovereign. What I am saying is member states alone cannot fight pandemics on their own. And the WHO is nowhere near saying that you will do the following or else. It is not saying that. So I would like to take this opportunity to reassure you, reassure viewers that this is not a case of you will be compelled to do the following. It is more a case of you will, you must cooperate and work together with us.
But Dr. Pania, Article 19 of the draft treaty in paragraphs 1C and D would require each World Health Organization member state to commit at least 5% of its national health budget, plus an unspecified as yet percentage of GDP, to pandemic preparedness and response. Now, when we were trying to get our waiting list down and all the rest of it in the NHS, I mean, surely that's crackers to require us to spend that amount of money. So that this thing is something that we're going to have to do.
Yeah, compelling, not requesting.
I'm really pleased.
Compelling.
Oh, let me answer this because it's really, really important. Really, one, we are not well unless all of us are well. And if we do not look after the health economy locally, nationally, and internationally, we are all poor as a result. What we need is member states to contribute properly and as much as they can with their GDPs proportionately. It is really important that we contribute to prevention, because if we contribute to preventative illnesses, we will all be healthier. So we cannot say that is Africa's problem, Africa sorts it out, because Africa's problem becomes our problem very quickly, take HIV, etc. So what I'm saying is these items like 5% or whatever, that's up for negotiation. But the point is, yes, the richer nations ought to contribute, and prevention is a lot,
Can I ask Chris Chope now, do you feel reassured by what Dr. Barrett has to say there?
No, I don't, I'm afraid, because essentially we've got a situation where the WHO has already been found wanting because, for example, China, were they fully cooperating in this recent pandemic? how can we be sure that they will cooperate in the future? We've got a voluntary arrangement which hasn't been working, and to try and make that into a compulsory one and require individual countries to decide perhaps against their better judgment something that's been decided by the WHO, which is an unelected body. And just take the example of what happened at the beginning of the pandemic. The WHO was against the idea of vaccine passports and lockdown.
So Christopher
and then within about 6 months, suddenly, without any change of the evidence, they changed their view. How did that come about?
So Christopher Chope, Dr. Bharat Pankania, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. We appreciate your time. Now, still to come this hour, we're talking about delayed diagnosis and a new NHS app that promises to help avoid it. But first, here's the latest headlines with Tatiana.
Phil, thank you. Good morning. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. Retail sales grew by 0.5% last month, following a fall of 1.2% in March. The Office for National Statistics says it's the highest increase since August 2021. Meanwhile, non-food stores saw a 1% increase, recovering from a 1.8% decline in March due to poor weather conditions. The First Minister of Wales will chair a community meeting in Cardiff after the deaths of two teenagers sparked a riot. 16-year-old Kyrie Sullivan and 15-year-old Harvey Evans were killed while riding an e-bike. The police watchdog is investigating after CCTV footage emerged showing a police van following the teens before their deaths. Cars were set alight and windows smashed in the violence, with 9 people remaining arrested following the disorder. An 11-year-old boy is in a critical condition after being hit by a police car in Lancaster. The force says it was attending an emergency call when the collision occurred last night. The officers are working to establish what happened and referred the incident to the police watchdog. Actor Hugh Grant's damages claim against The Sun will go ahead to a trial following a ruling by a High Court judge. Mr Grant has accused the publisher of unlawful information gathering. He alleges the paper sent private investigators to break into his home and steal his private information and place listening devices inside of his home and his car. The publisher has denied all allegations. And the Prince of Wales will meet Grenfell survivors and bereaved families ahead of the 6th anniversary of the tragedy. Prince William will also visit Queen's Park Rangers Football Club to find out how they provided support following the aftermath of the Tower blaze. The Grenfell fire claimed 72 lives in 2017. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2351 and 1.1513 euros. The price of gold is £1,580 and 99 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,566 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, fire
famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Dubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil. Now, GPs will be offered financial incentives to recruit patients into trials of new treatments, and hospitals will be given research targets under plans to reverse a slump in clinical testing while the NHS struggles with the backlog from COVID-19.
Meanwhile, there's going to be an NHS app where you can choose where you go for GP appointments.
Well, it comes as we hear more and more about delayed diagnosis due to delays in getting those appointments.
Well, someone who's written about this extensively is oncologist Professor Carol Sikora. Carol, thank you very much for joining us. Of course, you've written a book about this as well. I just wondered about, in terms of delayed diagnosis, particularly cancer diagnosis, which is a real issue and I know was the focus of your book. What is the problem with that? I mean, has the lockdowns and the pandemic played a big part in this, in that for 2 years or so, people weren't, getting appointments, they weren't being diagnosed, they weren't getting treatment? Is that one of the major problems and maybe one of the main explanations for excess deaths?
I mean, there's no doubt that the pandemic has resulted in a real blow to the capacity of the NHS. Even now, we're still clearing a backlog. People are waiting. And, before we weren't that good, the reason that our cancer survival statistics are poorer than the rest of Europe is simply the diagnostic phase is too drawn out. I sat on a committee in the Department of Health in the year 2000, and we came up with an idea, the 2-week wait. If your GP thought you had cancer, you had to be seen within 2 weeks. We thought that would only be for 3 or 4 years, and by then everyone would be seen in 2 weeks, but that never happened. And so the capacity isn't there. So the best advice I can give people, and what I write about in the book, is you've got to be pushy without being aggressive. You've got to try and look after yourself in a system that's not particularly consumer friendly. And we all love the NHS, I understand all that, but it's not a consumer organisation. And, the fact to get a GP appointment, you have to phone up, you have to argue, sometimes you have to wait an hour before the phone gets answered, all that sort of stuff. And hospitals are no better. So, I've been an NHS consultant for 40 years. They're no better. We don't put any attention to consumerism because you've got nowhere else to go. You're stuck with a monopoly.
I think you called it polite persistence is what you need to do to make sure that you get an appointment. But this diagnosis issue is a problem. Whether that's we don't want to go forward or don't want to see if there's something wrong. I mean, we just saw again in the paper, didn't we? Amy Dowden, the lady from Strictly, who's been diagnosed with cancer. We saw Sarah Harden, Girls Aloud, in the papers as well, in her late 30s, both of these with late stages of cancer. What is going wrong there?
It's just there's no capacity to do the tests necessary. The only way to diagnose cancer, two things you have to do. You have to do some sort of scan, and you have to get a biopsy, get a piece of tissue to look at it in the laboratory. So those are the two key items that have to be done. And many patients, it takes 2 months, even 3 months to get those done. In France, you'd have it done within the next week. In the same sort of national service, not in a private sector, in the public sector, it's all done within a week because they have the capacity. And for some reason, we haven't built up that diagnostic capacity, and that's what's causing the problem with cancer. And, you know, there's no point going in and swearing at staff or shouting and abusing them. That's going to close doors. It's polite persistence that I talk about.
So what about this NHS app? Is that going to help people, whether that's get diagnosed, whether it's to choose the hospital going to go? Is this as good as it sounds, this app?
I think it is. I think it would work, but will it really have the capacity to deal with the problem? You know, on my phone, the NHS app works so well for vaccine. I mean, there's no doubt it was a perfect system. It was a bit clunky to start with, but now I can see exactly what I've had, the code name of the vaccine I've had, the dates exactly, if I've had reactions and so on. But that was designed sort of around that. It's also very good to collect repeat prescriptions. You can order them from a pharmacist, and of course, the pharmacist is not really in the NHS. It's paid for by the NHS, but it's the chains of pharmacies around the country, and it works well. So it's not beyond the wit of the Department of Health to get an app that allows you to book a GP appointment, even to phone up NHS 111 and get a CT scan booked because you have symptoms that suggest you may have cancer. It could all be done.
Carol, just one thing, because it actually sent chills down my spine when I read this in the front page of the Times today. Bonus for GPs if patients take part in clinical trials. What are we now, guinea pigs?
Well, I don't think it's that sort of clinical trial. I mean, for example, cancer drugs, we give new drugs to patients. Someone's got to have it first, but it's in a very controlled environment. With general practice, one would be comparing best available treatment for something, whether it's depression or sleeplessness, with some new treatment. And they've got to be tried in general practice, because most of these drugs for these sort of diseases, these sort of symptoms, are in fact tablets. They're just tablets. So general practice is an underused resource for clinical research. And, the pharma industry would love to get more clinical research in general practice, and it could be quite appropriate. I wouldn't be scared of that. The good ethical guidelines and consideration of studies. And there's a lot of development with new drugs and tailoring them to an individual.
Well, I've heard what you said, and you usually reassure me. You usually do, but I'm a bit doubtful about this. But thank you very much indeed. And again, your book, all about cancer diagnosis and how we should be politely persistent and make sure we've got good health. Thank you very much indeed. There it is. There's the book.
Yeah, I thought it should be the patients who get a bonus for taking part in a clinical trial, shouldn't it, rather than the GP? And why does the GP get the bonus?
Trust me, it doesn't bode well. I don't like the look of them.
Anyway, we're joined now by Conservative peer Daniel Moylan and former Labour MP and author Simon Danczuk. Thank you both for joining us. What do you make of this thing, Simon, about cancer diagnosis and the fact that it seems to be so poor in this country compared to other countries? We put a lot down to the pandemic and lockdowns, and that clearly hasn't helped. But it seems that we weren't very good even before that.
Yeah, I think there are two problems. One is the pandemic and the impact. I think we locked down far too heavily. It wasn't a sophisticated lockdown. We could have locked down certain groups of individuals and not others, and that's had a real impact on the NHS. But then the second issue is the NHS itself, and it's just not fit for purpose, as the professor suggested. It's certainly not consumer focused. It's quite the opposite. It's run along communistic lines, actually. It's more focused on the worker within the NHS than it is the patient. And until that changes, it needs radical overhaul, and these are the problems in terms of cancer treatment.
Do you share that view, Daniel? And if Simon is right, do you think there'll ever be any appetite amongst the political classes to try and tackle the NHS? Because it seems untouchable politically.
Well, you've got two things going on, haven't you? One is you can't touch the NHS because it's a national treasure. Line of argument, even though it has lots of failings. And the other is, in order to fix it, you probably need more money, and you have the Treasury standing in your way every time you try and do it. I would want to draw the private sector in more. I think you can introduce an element of consumerism. If people are allowed to go, can't get to see a GP, I'll go to a private GP. Can't get this, I mean, there are places that, you can go to have scans that just do scans in the private sector. I can't get a scan from an NHS hospital.
There's a bit of that going in. There was a bit of patient choice, but people didn't really use that choice.
It's not really a lot of patient choice. That's hospital choice. The hospital might draw in somebody like that. But the patient actually saying, you can't get it here within a fortnight, so you get a voucher, the NHS pays for it over there. Of course, there was somebody, the moment I say that, there's somebody in the Treasury saying, what's that going to cost? What's that going to cost? Well, the scan itself won't cost any more than it does in the NHS. The NHS is not cheap to run. It's not that. It's just that they're really worried people might actually
There
be
is a
used
school of thought, Simon, that says that actually it will take a Labour government to sort out the NHS, that the Conservatives are so petrified of being seen as being anti-NHS and privatising the NHS that actually only the Labour Party has the space in order to do some of these things, as Tony Blair did when he introduced the private sector into producing NHS treatment. Do you buy that argument?
Yeah, I think there's probably some truth in that, and the person to do it, the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, is probably the nearest you would get to Blairite in the Shadow Cabinet. And he has talked about more involvement of the private sector, which I think should be welcomed, building on what Lord Moylan says there, and using technology as well. The app, the NHS app, I think that's helpful.
Because it's quite interesting. We always say free at the point of need, at the point that you're using it, but some people say, no, it's got to be done by the NHS, whereas other people are prepared for the private sector to get involved. And that's why I seem to have the arguments of people. I'm saying, if it's free, does it matter whether it's being done by a private organisation or whether it's being done by the NHS?
Well, of course it doesn't, but the unions, of course, have got this big thing going. They don't want anything escaping outside the NHS framework. Now, and there is a leftist sort of a cultish outside the unions. There's a cultish thing about it. You're privatising the NHS as if that's a wicked thing to do. When all you're doing is you're making use of private sector resources, which, of course, would grow more rapidly if you had the demand.
Now, we were discussing earlier with Giles Kenningham about whether or not the civil service has got it in for the Conservative Party, and particularly certain elements of the Conservative Party, like Boris, like Suella, Braverman. Obviously, Dominic Raab was
like a leak a week.
As a former Labour MP, Simon, do you buy this, that the civil service are in effect politically active in what they're doing, or do you think that they are just doing what they think is what they're duty bound to do?
No, I think there's a major problem with the civil service, actually, and particularly in the Home Office, and we'll probably talk later about immigration. They have an agenda, the civil service have an agenda. We spent days talking about Suella Braverman's speeding ticket when we really need to be tackling immigration. I think, why has that been leaked? Where has it come from? It's clearly come from civil servants. They need to be getting... The reason that we're not tackling immigration is because civil servants aren't delivering for the public. And I think they really need to get a grip of the civil service. And again, I think it needs an overhaul, and perhaps you need to involve... It's managing directors or bring people in from outside into the civil service.
Brenda here, one of our viewers, said, don't they sign an Official Secrets Act? Is there no way they can be prosecuted? But I think what Giles was saying earlier, used to work at Number 10, it is difficult to locate a leak.
Yeah,
and there's so many
it's-
people who will have that information. You've got emails, you've got, I don't know, WhatsApp messages.
They've had numerous leak inquiries. I can't think of one that's actually caught anybody. So the fact is that civil servants, if it is civil servants who are doing this, know that they're 99% likely to get away with it scot-free. I think one of the problems is, and it's a Blairite, goes back, like so much of our constitutional problems, goes back to the changes made by Blair and Brown. And this notion that the civil service has got in its head that it's somehow an independent arm of government, that it's there to speak truth to power, as if it was the Daily Mail or something, and that it's got an independent...
like the Daily Mirror, I think,
or the Daily Mirror,
Mail, isn't it?
Daily Mirror, maybe. And it's meant to be a sort of independent somehow. It's not. It is simply an arm of the government. It is an instrument of the government.
So do you have sympathy with Charles here in Folkestone, who says another attack on Boris Johnson by the lefties in the civil service? Who did they think they were handing over this information to the police? This is just a personal vendetta, and they won't be happy until he's in the dock.
What do you think about what Jennifer says here, Daniel? Because I think she makes a reasonable point. When you have senior civil servants at the heart of Westminster that have partners in the opposition parties and left-wing mainstream media, there will be leaks. It's time to stop this conflict of interest. If one partner is in a position to influence the British public, their partner should not be in a position in the civil service at the heart of Whitehall.
I think there is a worrying feature. It is a worrying feature because they all come from the same social class with similar background views, and they all live in the same sorts of places. And it is a worrying feature. But I think part of that is to do with the fact that the civil service used to be, you joined the civil service 30, 40 years ago, most people stayed for life. It offered you quite a satisfactory career with progression and pay movements and so on, and you got better at your job and you specialised and you rose up the ranks. Nowadays, deliberately, again, one of these big changes that came in is the idea of bringing in expertise from outside, they call it. But actually, it just means a revolving door, and people who come in have no real sense of obligation to the career that they've got, because they'll be often doing something else later on.
Well, I'll go back to that point there. Was it another attack on Boris Johnson? Was it needed to be? And join in your point as well, Phil, because in the Cabinet Office, though we don't know who it was, you will see somebody who's married to Labour front bench, shadow minister. So there is issues.
Yeah, absolutely issues. But, I mean, what could be argued is that the Conservatives have had 13 years to sort out the civil service. And whilst I agree that it needs radical overhaul, we haven't seen that from the Conservative government. And I think they should have done more to change the nature of the civil service in the time that they've had.
Have you ever watched Yes, Minister, Simon?
Yes, I have, absolutely. It's not easy,
Is it possible to sort of... I mean, there's more and more calls for an American-style system where governments bring in their own administration. Do you think that...
There has to be some change. It cannot go on as it is. You've got a ruling party, an successfully elected party, and the civil service are rallying against it.
Simon, we'll see you in the next hour. Daniel, we see you in the next hour. I know our viewers certainly thought that there is definitely a concerted effort to get out the Conservative ministers there, but there's plenty more still to come, including what today's retail figures mean to the economy.
And as net migration peaks at new record levels, we'll be speaking to immigration lawyer Skylar McKeith about the strain on the country.
See you after the break.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil. Still ahead, we'll be bringing you the latest on the 11-year-old boy who's in a critical condition after being hit by a police van responding to an emergency call in Lancashire.
And what do today's retail sales figures mean for the economy? Political and social commentator Lizzie Zeta will fill us in.
And there are growing concerns over security around Whitehall. It comes after a car crashed into the gates of Downing Street. Police have made 1 arrest, but are not treating it as terror-related.
Plus, we'll be crossing live to our reporter Sophie Reaper in Liverpool, who's brushing shoulders with royalty. She's at the Battle of the Atlantic National Memorial launch with a very special guest of honour.
And as ever this morning, we want to hear from you, so do get involved with the show. Email us at gbviews at gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. But before we start, here's your latest headlines with Tatiana.
Esther, thank you very much. It's 1 minute past 11. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Retail sales grew by 0.5% last month, following a fall of 1.2% in March. The Office for National Statistics says it's the highest increase since August 2021. Meanwhile, non-food stores saw a 1% increase, recovering from a 1.8% decline in March due to poor weather conditions. Strategy and Insight Director Andy Mulcahy says an increase in sales on non-food items are a good indicator of the current economic status.
Non-food is kind of terminology for it's not essential for you to buy, right? So it's things like clothes and home items, electronics, things like that. So that tells you about discretionary spend. Now, because everybody's under so much financial pressure, that is the area where you look at and think, well, if people have got a bit of money they don't mind spending on clothing and things like that, then that's actually kind of a good indicator. You know, we are scratching around a little bit for positive economic news.
The First Minister of Wales will chair a community meeting in Cardiff after the deaths of 2 teenagers sparked a riot. 16-year-old Kyrie Sullivan and 15-year-old Harvey Evans were killed while riding an e-bike. The police watchdog is investigating after CCTV footage emerged showing a police van following the teens before their deaths. Cars were set alight and windows smashed in the violence, with 9 people remaining arrested following the disorder. An 11-year-old boy is in a critical condition after being hit by a police car in Lancaster. The force says it was attending an emergency call when the collision occurred last night. The officers are working to establish what happened and referred the incident to the police watchdog. Former Met Detective Peter Bexley told GB News what's the next step of the investigation.
The scene of this collision will already have been examined to see if the position of the vehicle or any other vehicles potentially involved, any debris can give any indicators as to exactly how the collision occurred, together with any tyre marks that there might be on the road, because from tyre marks, traffic investigators can calculate speeds and the like, braking distances. And it's surprising just how much information a tyre mark can reveal.
Russia has warned it will launch a preemptive strike if the West gives Ukraine nuclear weapons. It follows the Ukrainian capital reporting an increased danger of Russian missile strikes in the early hours of this morning. 1 person was killed and 15 wounded at a clinic in the eastern Ukrainian city of Dnipro, with rescue work currently underway. The Prince of Wales will meet Grenfell survivors and bereaved families ahead of the 6th anniversary of the tragedy. Prince William will also visit Queen's Park Rangers Football Club to find out how they provided support following the aftermath of the tower blaze. The Grenfell fire claimed 72 lives in 2017. The FBI has released files showing a potential plot to assassinate Queen Elizabeth during a visit to America. The Queen and her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, visited California in 1983. A man seeking vengeance for his daughter's death during the Troubles had unknowingly revealed his intentions to an off-duty police officer in a bar. The documents show how the FBI, which helped secure the monarch's safety during her visits in the late 80s and early 90s, worried about IRA threats. Actor Hugh Grant's damages claim against The Sun will go ahead to trial following a ruling by a High Court judge. Mr Grant has accused the publisher of unlawful information gathering. He alleges the paper sent private investigators to break into his home and steal his personal information, as well as place listening devices inside of his home and his car. The publisher has denied all allegations. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Esther and Phil.
Thank you, Tatiana. We woke up to the news this morning that an 11-year-old boy has been taken to hospital in a critical condition after being hit by a police van in Lancashire.
Lancashire police say it happened just before 8:30 last night as officers were responding to an emergency call. Our thoughts are with the child's loved ones at this time, they said.
The force says an investigation is underway and the matter has been referred to the Independent Office for Police Conduct.
Well, we're joined now by former police sergeant and senior investigating officer of serious and fatal road traffic collisions. That's Harry Tang. So what will be happening now? How will the investigation be going ahead into this matter?
Well, it starts from the very beginning, and a senior investigating officer will be on scene as soon as possible. There's probably a family liaison officer if it's a serious, considered serious, life-threatening and life-changing incident. So we need to find out exactly everything about the vehicles involved, road surface, whether all the lights were working correctly, if they should have been on. And then there's literally a fingertip search on the scene for any forensics that is available. And often witnesses' initial witness accounts can vary as they go through, and any witnesses, especially if they're young or they're vulnerable, they'll be looked at. But getting that evidence with both specially trained officers that have absolutely trained not to have any influence, and it's very much obtaining best evidence. It will be videoed, it will be audioed, it will be in a comfortable setting, so we can really get the best evidence as what's going on. So you're looking at the weather conditions, the road layouts, the road conditions itself. The vehicle will be examined, the vehicles involved will be examined to see, just make sure the steering and the brakes are working correctly. And obviously the officers involved will be investigated to find out from them exactly what it was that established as far as they were concerned. And if there are any offences that should be considered, then they will be looked at in due course. But it's really important to get all that information, not to speculate. Police cars, I know myself, the police do millions of miles on blue lights, and there is remarkably few collisions because of the training. And that will be part of it. Make sure the officers were qualified to be driving under those conditions and that side of things.
Harry,
it's
can
a
you just
tragic,
give us a
awful situation? But you know, when humans are involved, sometimes things happen like this, and it's important we get to the end of it, to the bottom of what happened.
Harry, can you give us an indication of the kind of training that drivers go through with the police before they are allowed to do sort of pursuits and chases? What's the intensity of that training?
Well, pursuits and chases are, if we'll use that term because the public are more familiar with that, are very much different qualification to blue lights. So it's important we get someone who is going to a violent domestic, that they're not stuck in traffic. So blue light officers, if you like, usually the front line, usually response officers, usually, but not always. They can be traffic and armed response as well, not being used in their mode as such. But it's important we get any police officer to the scene quickly. And so that is a lower level, and it will be sort of, it will vary. But if there's, most forces at least standard driving course now, which is 4 weeks. But if it's literally going to a blue light, and a lot of forces now, to be honest, and it's usually national, they can put the blue light at the scene, but a lot cannot go through traffic and cannot overtake, etc., until they've done at least that week's blue light course. Then you're getting to traffic, of course. It's 4 weeks standard. And then it's advanced driving, which is your main traffic car, I should say.
Harry Tang, we can see that. That's certainly a lot of training there. And I know it's your area of expertise. So thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning.
Now, anyone with any information or has any CCTV or dash cam footage that may assist this investigation is being asked to call 101 and quote log 1388 of May 25th.
A spokesperson for the IOPC said, "We understand that a marked police van with its lights and sirens on was in a collision with an 11-year-old boy. He has been taken to hospital and our thoughts are with him and his family. Our investigation is at an early stage." Now, concerns are growing over safety and security at Whitehall. It's since a man was arrested on suspicion of criminal damage and dangerous driving after a vehicle was driven into the gates of Downing Street.
The Met Police say no one has been hurt, and it's understood that counter-terrorism police are not involved in the investigation at this stage.
Rishi Sunak is understood to have been in Downing Street when the crash happened, and many civil servants were leaving work at the time.
We cross live now to Downing Street to get the latest from our political reporter, Catherine Forster. What's the latest update on what happened, Catherine?
Yes, good morning, Esther and Phil. Well, we were the first press allowed in this morning back into Downing Street after the drama of yesterday afternoon. All very calm here now, but very dramatic yesterday afternoon, wasn't it? 4:20, this silver Ford Kia crossed the road and then hit the gate at Downing Street. I had a look at the gate when I arrived, talking to police officers. There's always a big police presence here, as you would expect, and basically, there's two sets of gates. There's the big inner wrought iron gates, which were brought in under Margaret Thatcher to counter potential IRA terrorist attacks. Of course, there was a mortar bombs launched from a van in Whitehall on 1991, and actually 4 people in Downing Street were injured. But there's another set of gates about waist height. Now, the car did actually break through that. There's a small amount of damage to those gates, and that came to a rest at the large gates. Now, luckily, of course, we know that nobody was injured. There's no suggestion that this was terror related. The man, a white man in his 50s, still being questioned by the police, we understand, thought to relate to potential mental health issues. We will no doubt get more information on this later today. But just a reminder, I suppose, of the reason that there is such security here, these big gates and such a big police presence. There's armed police. Every time you come into Downing Street, you have to go through like an airport scanner. I have to have everything checked through my bag. I have to go through an airport style scanner. And just a reminder, Rishi Sunak was here, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt was here. They were taken out by the back gates. Rishi Sunak is now up in his constituency, Richmond, for the weekend, expected back after the bank holiday weekend.
Catherine Forster, thank you very much indeed for bringing us up to date with that. Now, hopefully some good news for the economy this morning, because UK retailers saw sales return to growth in April as shoppers continued to spend despite continued high inflation.
Supermarkets were among retailers to report higher sales despite food inflation remaining close to a 45-year high.
Retail sales increased by 0.5% in April after a 1.2% fall in March. Here to break down these figures for us is political and social commentator Lizzie Zeta. Fantastic, thanks to have us here today. Well, this is good. I'm wanting the positivity here of some good news. So unpick those figures and make me feel happy.
OK, well, there's lots of reasons to feel happy. First of all, we grew by 0.5%. And the prediction was 0.3%. So that's very, very good. Shoppers are coming back. In March, the figures were a bit down because we had such dreadful weather, but now they're picking up again. So we are slow but resilient, and we've avoided recession, which is fantastic news.
Yes, something Germany is not
yes.
Yet. So I just have to bring that in, yes.
No, absolutely.
Yes.
And also, what does this mean for the punter in the street, and for me, and for most ordinary people? There is still a lot of pain out there. For example, there were 700,000 defaults just this last month on mortgage repayments, on rent, on bills, etc., etc. So that's not good. The food prices are still at 19% inflation, which is just horrendous, which is not great for everybody. Energy bills, they say they're going to go down. But then again, the government, they're going down by £400. But then again, the government is withdrawing the support. So, you know, it's kind of a bit of a mixed figure, but behind we are slow, but we are resilient, and this is all good news.
If I want to put a downer on things, which is my...
It's your usual... temperament, usually is nature.
It's my job. If food inflation's going at 19%...
Yes.
...and sales are only up a smidgen...
Yes.
That doesn't... if I was a retailer and my prices had gone up 19%, if my sales figures are less than 19% up, I'm actually selling a lot less, aren't I?
Well, apparently there has been an increase by 0.7% in food prices. So it's quite strange.
But the food prices is going up.
Yes.
Yeah, so you'd expect the sales, but the sales are going up slower than the prices are going up. That's my point.
So you're saying
so they're buying less, aren't they?
You're saying they haven't passed that on then to the customer there?
No, they have passed it on, but people are buying less because they've got less money. That's what I'm saying is that because if they were buying the same, the sales would have gone up higher, wouldn't they? Because the prices are higher.
Yes, indeed.
That's the point.
But I look at it a different way. I think there could be the buoyancy could be because people are going to the shops, maybe rather than going out. So somebody else might be feeling the impact, like restaurants, cafe bars. Because
the restaurants are definitely down. Takeaway is definitely down.
There you go.
But I tell you what's really up: 61% of people have booked a summer holiday this year. I mean, that's incredible.
Right.
We cannot wait to leave the country. So there must be...
Need a holiday.
Yeah,
so everything's been so depressing.
But people are prioritising their spend. I mean, people in a way are as responsible as they can be. It's sad news there about mortgage, but people are saying, we might not be going out, we'll be spending it here, but they are also saying we need our spirits lifted. They have decided that a holiday is a priority.
No, it is a priority. There's been a massive spike. And also people are being smart and savvy. They've booked their holidays early, they booked them back in January, and they're booking all-inclusive expensive so that they know what they're going to spend.
Just quickly, Lizzie, it seems to be, to me, to be a mix. I mean, I used to work in retail before I was an MP. I worked for Asda for 12 years. It seems to be, so I'm interested in this area. It seems to be a mixed bag. I mean, M&S seem to be doing really, really well.
Yeah, they are, great.
And they're sort of, you know, going gangbusters. Whereas
John Lewis, not so good.
Whereas, exactly, John Lewis and Waitrose or whatever seem to be struggling a lot more. So it seems to be a very mixed bag out there.
It is a mixed bag of that. I mean, you know yourself, you've come from retail. I used to work in fashion. It's a war out there trying to get your figures up all the time. It's very, very difficult. But Marks and Spencer's are doing really well, much better than expected figures. And I think they've got their fashion together. And also, it's the food. My mother loves M&S because of the quality of the food and because you know what you're going to get, and also because of their excellent returns policy, as is the case in John Lewis. But John Lewis at the moment are lagging behind. In fact, they're going into the property market.
Well, I don't know how that's going to go for them.
Look, we all want a good deal. We all want value for money.
We do.
We saw Home Bargain, one of the richest people now from Liverpool, because we all love a deal and we all like value for money. Lizzie, you're value for money. We like you here. You're a bargain. You can come in next week.
Thank you very much.
Having you.
Now, still ahead as net migration in the UK reaches a record high. How much of a strain is it putting on the nation? Immigration lawyer Skylar McKeith joins us next.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Dubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil. It's 11:22. Where's the time going?
I don't know. Well, it may not have surprised you to learn that net migration has reached a record high, 606,000 last year.
The PM insists migration is not out of control, but after more than a decade of Conservative-led governments promising to reduce numbers, the figures inevitably represent a political challenge for Mr Sunak.
New measures to buck the trend include restricting some overseas students from bringing their families to the UK. We can speak now to immigration lawyer Skylar McKeith. Skylar, what do you make of these figures? I mean, this year it's 600,000. I mean, people are forgetting last year figures were 500,000. It wasn't as if it's gone up, massively this year. They're clearly unsustainable figures. Obviously inflated by taking lots of people from Ukraine and Hong Kong. What do you feel the government should be doing that they're not already doing to get on top of this issue?
That's right. Well, this is a record number. So a large number of that is from the humanitarian migration caused by significant world events. And there's also many people arriving for work purposes or as dependents of those on work visas, in addition to students and their dependents. So clearly something does need to be done because there have been issues identified with such a large influx of migration. So an issue identified is that with the larger amount of migration, strain could be placed on public services. One of the primary concerns is pressure on the NHS. An influx of migrants could increase the demand for healthcare services, which could lead to longer waiting times, stretched resources, and pressure could also be placed on housing. The high migration levels can contribute to increased demand for housing, especially it could also put up property prices and create housing shortages in areas with limited affordable housing. So it can lead to difficulties for both the migrants and the locals finding suitable accommodation. And
You're
then,
quite
of course,
right. I think they said they needed 250,000 homes a year just for people who are the migrants coming into the country. But what I want to know, when you say a lot of it is workers, work-related was a quarter of those numbers, 300,000 foreign workers. Are we addicted to foreign labour as a country?
So I think with foreign labour, they bring something different. They bring different experiences. It's the presence of international migrants alone. It doesn't necessarily displace UK citizens from job opportunities. The employment decisions are typically based on a combination of factors, including skills, qualifications, language proficiency, and experience. And a lot of UK companies have actually struggled to recruit from the UK in many different sectors. So that's also why they have been looking overseas to bring people to the UK to take these jobs. Also, at the same time, international migrants can complement the existing workforce rather than directly compete for jobs.
Skylar, I think the concern that many people have is that we've got millions of people in this country on out-of-work benefits. And yet it seems that as a country we're just writing off these people, that they don't need to work, they will just keep paying the benefits while we bring in people. And they're not people that we're bringing into the country aren't always doing high-skilled jobs. I mean, we're talking about people doing fruit picking is one of the issues at the moment. And people feel, well, why can't people who are on benefits in this country do that rather than bringing in people from abroad?
That's right. I mean, these jobs have been available to those people. They just have chosen not to take those jobs and instead take the benefits.
Sky, we've got to look at that. If they've chosen not to, what should we be doing in this country so that they're not choosing not to, but actually they're taking a job?
Well, then the benefit system needs to be looked at, and that maybe needs to be revamped in some kind of way, because that's clearly an issue. There's many jobs that are the lowest skilled jobs that British people just do not want to take, and then they will go and collect benefits instead.
Skylar McKeith, thank you very much for bringing your expertise to our show this morning. We appreciate it.
We better talk to our presenters' friends about that, the whole benefit system.
Yes,
who's
exactly.
Working, how many people are coming in.
I think that's what infuriates people, though, isn't it?
It is what infuriates people, that we're bringing... That's why I said, are we addicted to foreign labour? It's easier to bring foreign labour. We'll be speaking to Simon Danchuk and Daniel Moylan later on that. But looking over the pond right now, and Donald Trump has responded to Ron DeSantis' glitch glitch-ridden presidential campaign launch with Twitter founder Elon Musk by posing a series of doctored clips on his Truth Social and Instagram pages.
But what does this all mean for the 2024 election campaign?
Well, to bring us up to speed, we're joined by the chair of Republicans Overseas, Greg Swenson. Well, that was a disaster, wasn't it, for Ron DeSantis? I think Trump's team are calling him Ron Disasters Ron.
Yeah, no doubt it was a real clumsy announcement. It didn't go as planned, obviously. It was a mistake. I think if they could do it all over again, he might have stuck to a more traditional announcement. And you know, he quickly bounced back. He did some interviews on Fox and Real Clear Politics and a handful of other stations. So, you know, it was a nice experiment. It fell on its face, but I don't think this is, you know, a Rick Perry moment. You know, if you remember the Rick Perry disaster in a debate in 2012, which really ended his career as a potential presidential candidate. It's not Dukakis in the tank or John Kerry on the windsurfer. I think he'll bounce back, and I think he already has, frankly.
I mean, I'm a fan of Ron DeSantis, Greg. I'll be perfectly honest about that. But I mean, this is a hopeless task for him, isn't it? Trying to beat Trump for the Republican nomination. I mean, the polls I've seen, I think the last one had Trump. He was over 30% ahead amongst Republican primary voters. I mean, this is a shoo-in for Trump, isn't it?
No, it's really not, Philip. I mean, it's an obvious conclusion at this point. You know, it's clear right now, if the election were tomorrow, then Trump would probably win it. But remember, it's really early. At this point in the 2008 cycle, you know, Rudy Giuliani was leading the pack for Republicans, and Hillary Clinton was up 30 points over a relatively unknown candidate named Barack Obama, and you know how that ended. So, you know, this is a really early stage. Yes, it's a big spread, but a few months ago, before the Alvin Bragg indictment, before the famous elevating the misdemeanor to the felony scam in New York, you know, Trump was only up 10 points over DeSantis in a lot of polls. So, you know, these things are going to move around. And remember, President Trump, you have to almost view him as an incumbent. And right now you have a real incumbent in President Joe Biden and a quasi-incumbent in President Trump, both polling horribly. You know, when you think about it, Trump has only 50% of the Republicans that want him to run or that are behind him right now. For an incumbent, that is really low. No incumbent under 90 has ever won re-election. So I think those are some sort of, you know, trivial but important tidbits to keep in mind. In many respects, he's not doing so well.
So how is he going to chip through? How is he going to break through? Was it just by getting an early start and saying, I'm going to be the man who's going to stand forward? What's he going to have to do to get the public on his side and away from Trump?
I think, you know, Governor DeSantis is going to have to campaign the same way that he's acted as in his role as governor of Florida. It's just blocking and tackling. He doesn't have a great outgoing personality that's going to charm people on the campaign trail. But I think he has to do some retail politicking, get in front of people in Iowa and New Hampshire and other early states, and just block and tackle, just like he governs. You know, he's a real roll up the sleeves politician. It's a different approach than President Trump, but he's got incredible results to talk about. And I think that's what he has to lean on, is what he's done as governor, the fact there's no mystery why he won his reelection by almost 20 points in a state that was really a purple state, a swing state only a few years ago. He's turned Florida into a solidly red state.
Greg,
I think he's got a lot of good reasons to run and campaign on.
Greg, just quickly, if you can, is this a two-horse race for the Republican nomination? I mean, we've obviously got Nikki Haley running, Tim Scott running. Are they out of the picture altogether? Is this genuinely a two-horse race?
It's a tough call. Again, Philip, it's early, but if you look at the polls, no one is able to bust out of 5% or under. So, you know, Mike Pence, Nikki Haley, as you said, they're stuck below 5%. This could be a two-horse race. I think what's important is that the other candidates drop out quickly after Iowa and New Hampshire. If there's no chance that they can win, they really ought to drop out so that you can consolidate the non-Trump vote into one candidate. Look, there could be a surprise. It could be Tim Scott. It could be, any number of candidates that come out of the blue and emerge. But right now, it looks like the only viable candidate to beat Trump is Ron DeSantis.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for joining us. I thought DeSantis needs to do his good luck and his charm and his family man, sort of in comparison to Trump.
Yeah, you've got to admire Trump, though, haven't you? Ron Disaster, Ron De Sanctimonious. I mean, he's got all the...
I think he's even called him Rob, because nobody knows who he is. Well, coming up, are we now a shameless society? If you've not heard of the teenage TikTok prankster, well, we'll tell you all about him, but it's definitely delinquents online. Don't go anywhere.
Good morning, it's 11:32. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. Retail sales grew by 0.5% last month, following a fall of 1.2% in March. The Office for National Statistics says it's the highest increase since August 2021. Meanwhile, non-food stores saw a 1% increase, recovering from a 1.8% decline in March due to poor weather conditions. The First Minister of Wales will chair a community meeting in Cardiff after the deaths of two teenagers sparked a riot. 16-year-old Kyrie Sullivan and 15-year-old Harvey Evans were killed while riding an e-bike. The police watchdog is investigating after CCTV footage emerged showing a police van following the teens before their deaths. Cars were set alight and windows smashed in the violence, with 9 people remaining arrested following the disorder. British Cycling will prevent riders who were born male from racing in elite female events under a new transgender policy. The rule will be implemented later this year and will see racing split into open and female categories. The female category will be for those whose sex was assigned female at birth, as well as transgender men who are yet to begin hormone therapy. And South Korean authorities have detained a passenger after an Asiana Airlines plane door was opened mid-air. The aircraft was flying from the island of Jeju to a city in South Korea when the door was opened by a passenger just before landing. No one was hurt, but some passengers were taken to hospital suffering with breathing difficulties due to shock. The traveller who opened the door was taken into custody, with police investigating a possible violation of aviation safety laws. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2361 and 1.1517 euros. The price of gold is £1,580 and 71 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,563 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle.
Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil. Today marks the launch of a new national memorial for the Battle of the Atlantic in Liverpool.
And they're getting a right royal welcome from none other than Her Royal Highness, the Princess Royal, patron of the Battle of the Atlantic Memorial Charity.
Let's cross live there now to our reporter, Sophie Reaper, who is going to give us the latest. What's happening in my beautiful hometown of Liverpool?
Very good morning to you both. Yes, we're in Liverpool this morning at Our Lady and St Nicholas Church, where inside the church at the moment, Her Royal Highness, the Princess Royal, is observing a memorial service commemoration. We've just seen a great number of naval officers come out of the church, so we're expecting Her Royal Highness to be coming out of the church any minute now, where she'll be unveiling a memorial to the Battle of the Atlantic. Of course, it's often described, the Battle of the Atlantic, as the longest and hardest fought battle in World War II. Now, that battle itself it was so significant because during that period, as an island nation during World War II, Great Britain was forced to rely on its allies and, of course, America to provide us with supplies. That's, of course, why Britain so famously utilised rationing during World War II. But, of course, they then came up against the German Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine, who used U-boats to try and prevent those rations and supplies from reaching Great Britain. So it was a huge battle that lasted almost the entirety of World War II, right from the beginning all the way up to May of 1945. So it was quite an expansive battle, and this year we're marking 80 years since that battle. So we're expecting Princess Anne any moment to be coming out of the church. After that, we'll be seeing fly past in order to start the commemoration here in Liverpool this weekend, which will thank and memorialise those people who fought in the Battle of the Atlantic.
Reaper, thank you very much indeed for giving us that update from Liverpool. It looks beautiful there as well, so enjoy the sunshine whilst you're there. And she's right, isn't it? That really was integral to winning World War II, that battle across the Atlantic. So fantastic that the Princess Royal's there today.
Now we're joined back in the studio with Conservative peer in the House of Lords, Daniel Moylan, and former Labour MP and author Simon Danchuk. So should we go back to those immigration figures. And there is a story here from Page, Fraser Nelson. The Tories actually, maybe they don't want to cut immigration, Daniel.
Well, I think the government is excessively relaxed about this. I think one of the things you have to remember, and this came out during the brief Truss premiership, is that the Office for Budget Responsibility, which is basically running the show, thinks immigration makes us richer. And they've got this wonky model to predict government revenues. I mean, like one of those models we had for predicting millions of people dying of COVID. And one of the factors in it is how much immigration there is. So the more immigration there is, the richer they think we are. And they say to the Chancellor, look, you can spend more money, you've got more taxes. If you cut immigration, they turn around like they did to Truss, and they say, no, you're going to be bankrupt, you have to borrow more, and your bond market will crash. So a lot of the problem arises from these people, completely unaccountable, and their wonky model, demanding more immigration, and I think the government is excessively relaxed about it.
I mean, that's what Fraser, I think, said in his piece, that Rishi Sunak was looking for growth. He didn't say on his 5 key pledges he was reducing immigration. And again, looking at those wonky models and those figures, they said, Jeremy Hunt yesterday was saying, but 41.9 billion boost from students, not talking about the wear and tear on everything in the country, housing, doctors, everything else. So what do you think, Simon?
Yeah, well, my perspective, I'm traditional Labour, not North London Labour, and what that means is that tough on illegal immigration, tough on dodgy benefit claimants, that's what traditional Labour was always about, and I think we need to get back to that sort of model. And you were talking about this earlier. We've got 600,000 people coming into the country. It's not sustainable. And yet we have 9 million people of working age who are economically inactive. Now, some of those must be doing the jobs that need doing. We don't need to bring people into the country to fix the model that you've just been taught, economic model.
Thinking those jobs aren't good enough for us. Somebody else can do them. Bring them. Is this what it is?
I think that's part of it. There's a lot of mental illness in that proportion of people as well that needs addressing, and that's increased since the pandemic. But we have to get our people back into work, doing those jobs. Then we can reduce immigration. That's a simple solution, and we need a whole government approach to it. It's not just the Home Office. You need it working across the whole of government.
It seems, Simon, that lots of our viewers agree with you. Alistair says, train our own people. Companies want the fast buck. It's cheaper in the short term to bring in foreign workers, but that well runs dry. Train here, and in the long term, the labour remains and society improves. David says, cut the benefits. Kids leave school and go on benefits. No benefit should be available unless you have 5 years contributions. Why are we putting up illegal immigrants in hotels, giving them free accommodation, enabling them to work for cash? Sylvia says the same thing, quite agree with you about people coming to this country. That's fine if they have something to offer and pay their taxes, but the government need to take their blinkers off and live in our world. I mean, do you take Daniel Moylan's point? Because I think he's onto something there, in that, you know, the Office of Budget Responsibility think that more immigration brings growth. The government want to be able to say we're going to have growth, we're not going to have a recession, rather than looking at GDP per person and looking at, you know, how that affects it individually. They're just looking at the overall economy, and if it means it goes up a bit, well, that's good politically.
Yeah, and it's a temporary fix. That's the problem. It's a short-term fix. You need a long-term fix to this problem. And bear in mind, the figures that are coming out don't include those that have come into the country undetected. It doesn't include those, and there are many of those.
Can I just bring out this, because I thought this was intriguing, as Daniel said. An opinion poll of 17 countries across Europe showed Britain was more relaxed than anyone else about these new arrivals. In fact, we remain the only country in Europe without any anti-immigration populist party, either in Parliament or in the polls. Are we more tolerant? Aren't we kicking up enough fuss as a country, as a population?
I don't think it's a question of tolerance. I think we are tolerant of people, immigrants, people with different backgrounds, people from different countries. I think we're much more tolerant than many European countries are. That isn't the point. The point is the capacity to absorb these people, and the fact that it is, as Simon said, it is a broken short-term model. an awful lot of these jobs, not all of them, but an awful lot of these jobs could respond to automation. And you get no investment by the business community in modernisation, automation and things like that. You don't see that happening. Why? Because they just ring up number 10 or whoever it is and they say, we're business and we want more cheap labour. And the taps kept on. In fact, the taps are flowing faster than ever. They were.
And that hurts us on the ground, doesn't it? It hurts us regular folk.
Simon, I just wondered where the Labour Party is on this, because it was quite extraordinary, I suppose, in many respects, that this week at Prime Minister's Questions, Keir Starmer was, in effect, having a go at Rishi Sunak for not controlling immigration and in effect, thereby implying that he would. Yvette Cooper's been doing pretty much the same with Suella Braverman. Has there been a sea change in Labour's position here? Do they now see that there's a market here, particularly amongst traditional Labour voters, that they now might be a party that wants to cut immigration?
I think it's very interesting that Keir Starmer felt confident to lead on immigration at PMQs. He would normally have, a Labour leader would normally have avoided the subject. So they're building some confidence in this, not least because the Conservatives have failed to get on top of this issue. We removed 38,000 people last year from this country, failed asylum seekers, the lowest removals rate in history, apart from during the pandemic. The system's broken. I don't think Labour will be any more effective on it, I have to say. I think Keir Starmer is in favour of open borders and free movement of people, but he's certainly talking tough on it in an attempt to win government.
He's listening to the polls and the voters, because a third of them are now saying this is our biggest issue, is immigration, behind the economy, behind the NHS, and 66% of the public are saying we're too overcrowded as a country, too overcrowded.
Yeah, but he's also listening because he has a huge, amongst the Labour base, there's a huge number of people who are pro-EU, want to get back into the single market, mainly because they like freedom of movement and they want all those Europeans coming back. So I don't think you can... I wouldn't trust him to deliver anyway. And I think the machinery of government is against him. Like I say, the OBR, the other bits of the machinery of government are against all the political parties who want to do something about it.
I guess, Daniel, one of the things that puzzles people is that, you know, those of us who voted for Brexit in the referendum, one of the biggest issues was to end free movement of people, in effect to try and cut immigration. And yet the net immigration figures are higher now than when we were in the EU. That's a bit that people find puzzling, if I'm being generous.
Anyone who is a Conservative who wants to defend the government on this point obviously has a very difficult challenge facing them. I don't feel up to doing that.
Well, my other thing, you know, the universities seem to have their own sort of desires. They want to empire build, go bigger and bigger. So you've got the universities issue, right? And they're looking at what works for them, not works for the country, not works for anybody else, but what works for them. And they want it to grow. And my issue is, we can keep the university, but shouldn't we just change what they need to do? Educate those who need to. But when, as Simon rightly says, we've got millions of people who aren't working, of working age, who could, should we not change the universities to help those people on benefits into work? Shouldn't we change what they do now? It's an outdated model serving only the vice-chancellors and the professors.
Well, I think there's a lot to be said for that. The argument they would make is that they can afford to have relatively low fees for British students because of the profits they make from the foreign students. So, to be fair, that would be their argument and their defence. But I think it is true they have become a huge business sector with their own interests.
Ray here says, where did the rule allowing students to bring dependents in come from?
Yeah,
someone should be sacked. And I think lots of people might agree with you about that.
And it's the idea that they can stay working after they've studied is also... because that very often turns into permanent residence.
So the government have said, haven't they, Simon, that they're going to stop that?
Well, yes. But look at it, it's 600,000 coming in, right, to students, and it's about 150,000 dependents. It's significant numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. And now they've said they're going to change it. But the immigration advisor said to government, you shouldn't allow family members to come in. And the government, the Conservative government, ignored that. And the figures of family members coming with students have doubled from 2021 to 2022. The figures have doubled. Why would we do that? It just doesn't make sense.
Well, I go back to Daniel's point there. They're looking at the OBR, they're looking at, oh, money's coming in, oh, well, we've got to support them and the family. These are people taking master's degrees or PhDs. But the answer's no. Daniel, I think...
Just fine, I just want a one-word answer. Who's going to get the Republican nomination, Trump or DeSantis?
Trump.
There you go.
Right, and before we go, let you know what's just come in. Well, that tearaway TikTok prankster, Mitzi, has just been arrested again, days after being fined for entering a family's home without permission. This is breaking news.
The Met said in a statement that he's been taken into custody with inquiries are ongoing.
So there he is. I mean, you know, this really is social media delinquency, and we do need to get a grip of this as well.
We'll leave the police to do their investigation, but I think the thing that worries me about just the general thing, not his particular case, but just generally, is that it seems that many young people feel that their way to stardom is to do outrageous things and put it on TikTok and social media, and I think that's a culture that I find quite troubling, personally.
Well, they think it's a way to money by any means, and that's not right. As you said, let the police do their investigation, but to me, it's social media delinquency. I think we better say thank you to Daniel. We better say thank you to Simon as well. That's all we've got time for today. But up next, it's GB News Live with the wonderful Mark Longhurst, and we'll be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. with a whole range of topics.
Including, have we lost faith in our police? And are we tinkering on the verge of vanity, insanity? Find out all about it then tomorrow at 10. See you then.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Plenty of fine weather to come today, tomorrow, the day after, and right throughout the bank holiday weekend, although it might just turn a little cooler for many of us through the weekend. At the moment, this is the bigger picture. Weather fronts toppling towards Iceland, a big area of high pressure sitting across the country, bringing a lot of fine weather. Now, there's some cloud trapped under that high, so it's not blue skies everywhere, but for many of us, it will be a fine late spring day with decent spells of sunshine and warming up. There's a bit of a breeze blowing along the south coast and a bit breezier across northern Scotland. The cloud thick enough at times, maybe for a little bit of drizzle over the Highlands and the Northern Isles. A little cooler here as well, but for many in the sunny spells, high teens, low 20s, 22, 23, just